The dust of the open road clung to her like a second skin. The townsfolk, dressed in their Sunday best even on a Tuesday, barely gave her a second glance. There was a quiet strength in her posture, a resilience in her steady gaze that scanned the town not with desperation, but with a calm, appraising curiosity. While others saw poverty, Alistair saw a story. While they saw an empty purse, he saw a spirit that hadn't been broken by whatever hardships had led her here. He watched as she stopped by the town well, not to beg, but to splash cool water on her face, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips as she did so. He approached her just as she was about to ask the baker for a day-old loaf. "Excuse me," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. There was no fear in them, only a quiet inquiry. "I am Alistair Finch," he introduced himself. He saw a flicker of recognition, but not awe. "I saw you arrive. You seem resourceful." "For every place I've stopped, I've gathered seeds from the hardiest plants. The ones that grow in poor soil, the ones that survive with little water." Alistair was speechless. He, a man who dealt in gold bars and stock certificates, was looking at a different kind of wealth. This wasn't just a collection of seeds. It was a portfolio of resilience, a catalog of survival. "I have acres of land," Alistair said, the idea forming in his mind with the speed of a lightning strike. "Beautiful manicured gardens, but they are ornamental. They are for show. They have no purpose beyond being looked at." The wind howled across the dusty town of Willow Creek, carrying with it the faint scent of sagebrush and a hint of rain. It was a desolate sound, the kind that could make a person feel utterly alone in the world. At the edge of the small station, a rickety stagecoach groaned to a stop, its wheels caked with the mud and dust of a long, hard journey. From it stepped a young woman, her arrival as quiet and unassuming as the whisper of the wind itself. Her shoes were little more than torn cloth, and her dress was a patchwork of faded fabrics, each scrap telling a story of poverty and desperation. Her eyes, wide and anxious, darted nervously across the empty street, searching for a sign, a face, anything familiar in this strange new world. She clutched a small worn satchel to her chest as if it contained the very essence of her life. And in many ways, it did. Inside were the few keepsakes she owned, letters tied with a frayed ribbon, and the last remnants of a life she had been forced to leave behind. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The townsfolk, hidden behind the shutters of their homes and the windows of the general store, peeked out. Their curiosity piqued. Whispers traveled from one house to the next. Who was she? Why did she come alone, dressed like she had walked through storms and despair alike? Her name was Clara, and she was a mail-order bride. She had answered an advertisement, a promise of a new life far from the hunger and heartbreak of her old one. She was sent to meet a man she had never seen, a man whose letters promised stability, a home, and a future. But the words on a page were one thing. The reality of the man and the life he offered was a complete unknown. His hat shaded his eyes, but even from a distance, Clara could sense the authority in his presence, the quiet confidence of a man who owned not only land but the power to command respect. He dismounted from his horse with a fluid grace, dust kicking up around his polished boots. For the first time in months, Clara felt her breath catch in her throat, a sharp, sudden intake of air. This was not the man she had imagined from the letters. The letters had spoken of a simple rancher, a humble man looking for a partner. This man, he seemed larger, more intimidating, a man of wealth and power. Yet, there was something in the set of his jaw, the way his gaze swept over her without a hint of judgment, that made her chest ache with an unspoken recognition. He saw her. He truly saw her, not the rags she wore, not the worn gloves covering her calloused hands, not the tired lines etched into her young face, but her, the woman beneath the poverty. Clara? His voice was deep, steady, carrying the weight of mountains and rivers alike. It was a voice that could calm a storm or start one. She just nodded, too stunned to speak. The sound of her name on his lips was both a shock and a comfort. Every caution she had carried for weeks, every wall she had built around her heart, seemed to crumble under the unexpected warmth of his gaze. "You've come a long way," he said. There was no sarcasm in his tone, no hint of disappointment or expectation, only a simple, profound acknowledgement of her journey. Clara swallowed hard against the lump forming in her throat. She had braced herself for ridicule. She had expected rejection, to be looked upon as nothing more than a desperate girl in tattered clothes. Yet here was a man who looked at her as though he could see straight through the tattered fabric and into the very core of her soul. I didn't know what to expect," she finally whispered, her voice shaking with a mix of relief and lingering fear. He took a step closer, his boots crunching on the gravel that paved the street. The sound was crisp, definitive. "Neither did I," he admitted. And in that single shared instant, a quiet understanding passed between them. They were two strangers, bound by circumstance and a handful of letters, now standing on the precipice of a story that neither had dared to imagine. But life in Willow Creek was not simple, and the chasm between wealth and hardship rarely closed so easily. Clara would soon learn that she had to prove herself, not just to him, this mysterious, wealthy cowboy, but to a town that judged by appearances, a town wary of outsiders. Most importantly, she had to prove to herself that she had the strength to dare to hope again, to believe that she deserved more than the scraps life had always thrown her way. And for the millionaire cowboy named Jackson, The arrival of this woman in rags would awaken a tenderness he had long buried beneath layers of responsibility, suspicion, and a profound loneliness he never admitted to anyone. He had built an empire of cattle and land, but his heart had remained a barren territory. He had written for a wife out of a sense of duty, a practical need for a partner to run his household. He never expected to find a woman whose quiet dignity and resilient spirit could challenge the walls he had so carefully constructed around himself. Little did they both know, this meeting at the dusty station was just the beginning. Their path forward would be fraught with trials, misunderstandings, and challenges that would test the very limits of their endurance. The whispers of the town would grow louder, suspicions would arise, and secrets from both their pasts would threaten to tear them apart. The journey ahead was one that could either break them completely or bind them together forever, forging a love as strong and enduring as the land itself. As the stagecoach wheels rolled away, kicking up dust like memories chasing the wind, Clara took her first tentative step into the unknown. She walked towards Jackson, towards a future she couldn't possibly predict. She was unaware that she had already captured the gaze, and perhaps the heart, of a man who would see her true worth long before the world, or even she herself ever did. Their story was just beginning, a tale of two worlds colliding under the vast, unforgiving sky of the American West. Jackson led her to a wagon, far more practical than the fine horse he'd been riding, and helped her up. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was filled with unspoken questions. As they rode out of town, past the watchful eyes and towards his sprawling ranch, Clara saw the immense scale of his world. The ranch stretched to the horizon, a kingdom of grass and cattle. The house, when it came into view, was not a humble cabin but a grand two-story home, a fortress of prosperity in the middle of the wilderness. This was Jackson's reality, and now it was hers to navigate. Inside, the house was run by a stern-faced housekeeper who made her disapproval of Clara clear from the start. The staff whispered, their glances a mix of pity and scorn. Clara was an outsider, an imposter in their well-ordered world. Every day was a test. She learned to cook meals worthy of the grand dining table, to manage the household accounts, and to mend clothes with a skill that earned grudging respect. She worked tirelessly, determined to prove she was not a burden, but a partner. Jackson watched her, a silent observer. He saw her struggles, her quiet determination, and the moments of grace she showed in the face of hostility. He found himself drawn to her resilience, to the gentle kindness she showed to the ranch hands and the animals. He started seeking her out, not just for practical matters, but for conversation. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. She would tell him stories of her village, of the family she missed, and he would share the burdens of running his empire, the loneliness of being at the top. But their budding connection was fragile. A rival rancher, envious of Jackson's success, began spreading vicious rumors about Clara, painting her as a fortune hunter with a dark past. The town, already suspicious, turned cold. Even Jackson, influenced by the whispers and his own deep-seated distrust, began to pull away. Doubt, like a poison, seeped into their tentative bond. Clara, heartbroken, felt the familiar sting of rejection. She had dared to hope, dared to feel safe, only to have it all threatened. It was during a fierce blizzard, when Clara risked her own life to save a newborn calf, that the truth of her character shone through, brighter than any rumor. Jackson found her in the barn, half-frozen but triumphant, the calf safe and warm. In that moment, all his doubts vanished. He saw not a woman of rags or a fortune hunter, but a woman of immense strength and courage. He finally understood that her worth had nothing to do with her past or her possessions, but everything to do with the heart that beat so fiercely within her. He confronted the rumors head-on, defending her name and her honor to the entire town. He stood by her side, no longer a silent observer but a fierce protector. He had offered her a life of stability, but she, in turn, had offered him something far more valuable, a reason to open his heart. She had shown him that true wealth wasn't measured in acres or cattle, but in love, trust, and partnership. Their journey was far from over, but they would now face it together. The cowboy who had everything and the mail-order bride who had nothing discovered that, in each other, they had found their everything. Their love story, born from a simple letter and a dusty meeting, would become a legend in Willow Creek, a testament to the fact that sometimes the most beautiful futures are built from the most unlikely beginnings. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more tales from the heart of the West. We'll see you in the next video. The ride back to Jackson's ranch was silent, at first so silent that Clara feared even her breathing might disturb the vastness around her. The land stretched endlessly. Rolling fields, distant mountains, and the golden light of evening brushing the world in a soft glow. But even that beauty couldn't settle the storm inside her chest. She felt unworthy. Every bump of the wagon was a harsh reminder of her worn dress. The holes in her shoes, the way her hair messy and limp from weeks of travel hung lifelessly at her shoulders. What must he think of her? A millionaire cowboy expecting a wife, and receiving a girl who had nothing but resilience stitched into rags. She clutched the rough fabric of her skirt, her knuckles white. She had dreamed of this moment, of arriving at a new home, a new life. But now that it was here, all she felt was a hollow sense of dread. She was an imposter in this grand, beautiful world. Her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. "Is this your bride?" she asked, and the disbelief dripped from every single word like poison. Clara felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. It was as if the woman had seen straight through to her deepest insecurities and confirmed them all. She clutched her small satchel tighter, wishing the ground would open up and swallow her whole. Jackson's jaw tightened. He swung down from the wagon in one fluid motion, his presence suddenly twice as large. "Yes, her name is Clara." The housekeeper, Mrs. Hawthorne, let out a scoff that was barely concealed. Clara tried not to stare, tried not to let her awe show. She felt like a stray cat that had wandered into a palace. Every part of her, from her tattered clothes to her weary spirit, felt out of place. Jackson noticed her unease, the way she held herself stiffly, her eyes wide. He led her into the main living area, the firelight warming her face. "You don't have to be afraid here," he said gently, his voice low. He gestured around the large room. "This place, it's a bit much at first. Took me years to get used to it myself." His admission surprised her. She looked up at him, really looked at him, and saw not just the wealthy rancher, but a man who understood what it felt like to be overwhelmed. That small piece of shared feeling gave her just enough courage to speak. "I don't want to disappoint you." The words slipped out before she could catch them, a quiet, vulnerable confession. She hadn't meant to sound so fragile, but the truth had a way of escaping when her guard was completely down. Jackson stopped and turned to face her fully. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. Then, his voice, softer than she'd ever heard it, broke the silence. For the first time since arriving, Clara allowed herself to breathe. A deep, shuddering breath that felt like it released weeks of tension. The weight on her chest didn't vanish completely, but it lightened, just enough for her to feel a tiny, fragile spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could belong here after all. Jackson's simple words were a foundation, a starting point. And for a girl who had started with nothing, that was everything. She stood there, in the warmth of the fire, and for the first time, dared to look toward the future. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed Clara and Jackson's story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more tales of love, courage, and new beginnings. We'll see you in the next chapter.